Okay, great. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today's MIPS self-nomination application demo for the 2021 performance period. During today's webinar, CMS will provide an overview of the Qualified Registry and QCDR MIPS self-nomination processes for the 2021 performance period of the Quality Payment Program. And CMS will also provide a live demonstration of the Qualified Registry and QCDR self-nomination forms, as well as the QCDR measure submission template. And after the webinar, CMS will take as many questions as time allows. So now I'll turn it over to Sophia Sugamart, a health insurance specialist at CMS, to begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate the time you're taking to be with us. We do want to spend some time today, as mentioned before, to go over our processes that we have in place and our requirements and expectations and considerations to the self-nomination process and the criteria to approve vendors to be qualified clinical data registries and qualified registries in our MIPS program. Our self-nomination process typically occurs from July 1st to September 1st of the year prior to the performance period. So for 2021, self-nomination will begin on July 1st, 2020 and end on September 1st, 2020. Can we move to the next slide, please? And this is just a disclaimer to let everyone know that the information provided and presented here today is current as of now. Information is subject to change, and we do want you to be aware that you should be utilizing the resources when they become available to help you self-nominate should you choose to do so at that time. Next slide, please. Just an overall agenda for today. Our team will provide an overview of the information required of self-nomination, the criteria you must meet in order to be qualified as a QCDR or a qualified registry, what information should be, you should prepare for that self-nomination process, as well as the criteria you'll need to meet to get to potentially be qualified. After that, we will have a live demo, and in that demo, you'll see the actual application, and the team will walk through the different fields that are required and how the different helpful tricks and tips that are available to you as you complete the application, and kind of help you to get familiar with that if this is a new process. We also have, for those that are interested in becoming a QCDR, that QCDRs are able to develop and submit for our consideration QCDR measures. And so there is a specific template that needs to be used if QCDRs are wanting to submit measures. And so our team will provide a demonstration and walkthrough of that. And then we'll just go ahead and have a question and answer session to answer any questions you may have about the process or regarding the criteria. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hector to get us started.
Thanks, Sophia. So I'll be going over some of the requirements and information regarding the self-nomination. Next slide, please. A QCDR is defined as an entity that demonstrates clinical expertise in medicine and quality measurement development, that collects medical or clinical data on behalf of clinicians to track patients and diseases and foster improvement in the quality of care provided to patients. And it's also an entity with clinical expertise in medicine. Clinicians must be on staff with the organization and lend their clinical expertise in the work carried out by the organization as a QCDR. Also an entity with standalone quality measurement development, and also collects medical or clinical data on behalf of a MIPS clinician for the purpose of patient and disease tracking to foster improvement in the quality of care provided to patients. Clinicians work directly with their chosen registries to submit data on the 2021 MIPS quality measures or specialty set of measures they have picked. QCDRs may also support up to 30 QCDR measures. Next slide. Entities without clinical expertise in medicine and quality measure development that want to become a QCDR may collaborate with entities with such expertise. An entity that uses an external organization for purposes of data collection, calculation, or transmission may meet the definition of QCDR as long as the entity has a signed written agreement that specifically details the relationship, roles, and responsibilities of the entity with the external organization effective as of September 1st, the year prior to the year for which the entity seeks to become a QCDR. So for the 2021 self-nomination period, this agreement would have to be in place by September 1st, 2020. Next slide. A qualified registry is an entity that collects clinical data from an individual clinician, group, or literature group and submits it to CMS. Clinicians work directly with their chosen registry to submit data on the 2021 MIPS quality measures or specialty set of measures they have picked. Quality registries may not support QCDR measures. Next slide. When self-nominating to act as a QCDR or qualified registry, organizations attest to meeting all requirements set forth by the calendar year 2020 Physician Fee Schedule final rule for the quality payment program, which finalized the vendor requirements for the 2021 MIPS performance period. All CMS-approved QCDRs and qualified registries for the 2021 MIPS performance period are required to provide services for the entire performance period and applicable submission period. In the event a QCDR or qualified registry must discontinue services, they must notify CMS and support the transition to an alternate submission method or third-party intermediary. All CMS-approved QCDRs and qualified registries for the 2021 MIPS performance period are required to support the performance categories, measures, activities, and services listed on the CMS published qualified posting as a condition of their participation in the MIPS performance period. Next slide. QCDRs or qualified registries must have at least 25 participants actively participating within the QCDR or qualified registry by January 1st, 2020. The participants are not required to use the QCDR or qualified registry to report data to CMS, but they must be submitting data to the QCDR or qualified registry for quality improvement processes. QCDRs and qualified registries must implement and be able to accept data from a clinician, group, or vulture group should they wish to submit data on the MIPS quality measures and/or QCDR measures starting on January 1st, 2021. QCDRs and qualified registries are required to support the reporting of measures and activities in the quality improvement, and promoting interoperability performance categories. Next slide. QCDRs and qualified registries must include quality measure results and data on Medicare and non-Medicare beneficiaries as applicable. QCDRs and qualified registries must submit data via a CMS-specified secure method for data submission, such as a defined quality payment program data format. Additional information regarding data submission methodologies can be found in the Developer Tools section of the Resource section of the Quality Payment Program website. The link is provided on the slide. QCDRs and qualified registries must provide performance category feedback at least 4 times a year to all supported clinicians, groups, and virtual groups. If unable to submit feedback 4 times a year, the QCDR or qualified registry must notify CMS immediately. Performance feedback must include information on how participants compare to other clinicians within the qualified registry or QCDR cohort who have submitted data on a given measure. If a dashboard is available to clinicians with real-time feedback, CMS asks that the QCDR or qualified registry email the clinicians at least 4 times per year to advise that feedback is available. Next slide. QCDRs and qualified registries must comply with any CMS request to review your submitted data. QCDRs and qualified registries must have the ability to randomly request and receive documentation from clinicians to verify accuracy of data. QCDRs and qualified registries must also provide CMS access to review the Medicare beneficiary data on which 2021 MIPS submissions are based, or provide to CMS a copy of the actual data, if requested. QCDRs and qualified registries must certify that data submissions are true, accurate, and complete to the best of their knowledge. This certification includes the acceptance of data exports directly from an EHR or other data sources. If you become aware that any submitted information is not true, accurate, and complete, you will correct such issues promptly prior to submission or refrain from submitting it, and understand that the knowing omission, misrepresentation, or falsification of any submitted information may be punished by criminal, civil, or administrative penalties, including fines, civil damages, and/or imprisonment. Next slide. QCDRs and qualified registries must enter into and maintain with all clients an appropriate business agreement or contract that dictates the services offered to the client by the QCDR or Qualified Registry. The agreement must comply with HIPAA privacy and security rules. Electronic or written agreements are acceptable to CMS providing that electronic signatures or authorization are legal in your jurisdiction. QCDRs and qualified registries must obtain signed documentation to indicate each client has authorized a QCDR or qualified registry to submit their quality measure data to CMS for the purpose of MIPS participation. Signed verification of clinician names, contact information, cost charged to the clinicians, services provided, and quality measures or specialty-specific measure sets should be included. A practice administrator may give consent on behalf of a group or virtual group reporting as a group, but not for an individual clinician reporting as an individual. This process needs to comply with the requirements of the business associate agreements to ensure that it provides for your receipt of patient-specific data from an individual clinician, group, or virtual group, as well as the QCDRs or qualified registries disclosure of quality measure results in numerator and denominator data, and/or patient-specific data on Medicare and non-Medicare beneficiaries on behalf of clinicians, groups, or virtual groups. Next slide. CMS policy prohibits non-U.S. citizens from accessing CMS IT systems and also requires all CMS program data to be retained in accordance with U.S. federal policy. Specifically, National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-63, which outlines enrollment and identity proofing requirements for federal IT system access. Access to the quality payment program would necessitate passing a remote or in-person federated identity proofing process. A non-U.S. based third-party intermediary's potential lack of a Social Security number, TIN, U.S.-based address, and other elements required for identity proofing and identity verification would impact our ability to pass the necessary background checks. An inability to pass identity proofing may limit or fully deny access to the quality payment program if the intent is to interact with the quality payment program outside of the U.S. for the purposes of reporting and storing data. The calendar year 2019 Physician Fee Schedule final rule for the quality payment program amended this requirement to indicate that a third-party intermediary's principal place of business and retention of associated CMS data must be within the U.S. Next slide. During self-nomination, QCDRs and qualified registries are required to submit a data validation plan that thoroughly explains the process for validation of the data that will be submitted on behalf of individual MIPS clinicians, groups, and virtual groups. The data validation plan must include a process of verifying quality program eligibility of clinician groups and virtual groups, as QCDRs and qualified registries are required to identify their clinicians as eligible reporters, opt-in reporters, or voluntary reporters. Process of verifying accuracy of tax identification numbers or national provider identifiers. Process of calculating reporting and performance rates. Next slide. The data validation plan must also include a process for verifying that your system will only accept data on 2021 measures and activities during submission. This would be the 2021 MIPS clinical quality measures or electronic clinical quality measures and/or QCDR measures for the quality performance category, as well as the 2021 performing interoperability measures and objectives, and the 2021 improvement activities for that performance category. Also, a process used for completion of randomized audit for the quality, promoting interoperability, and/or improvement activities performance categories. At a minimum, the randomized audit must meet the following sampling methodology to meet participation requirements. It must include a sample of at least 3% of the 10 NPIs submitted to CMS with a minimum of 10 NPIs or a maximum sample of 50 10 NPIs. At least 25% of the 10 NPIs patients with a minimum sample of 5 patients and a maximum sample of 50 should be reviewed for all measures applicable to the patient. And lastly, it should include a process used for completion of a detailed audit for the quality, promoting interoperability, and/or improvement activities performance categories. Please note that a detailed audit is required if any errors are found through the randomized audit, regardless of significance or rate. Next slide. The QCDRs and qualified registries approved for the 2021 MIPS performance period must execute their 2021 data validation plan and provide the results to CMS by 5 p.m. Eastern on May 31st, 2022, within a data validation execution report. As described in the Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule for the Quality Payment Program, QCDRs and qualified registries must conduct the execution of their data validation plan prior to submitting the data to CMS for all performance categories supported to ensure that any identified issues or data errors can be corrected prior to data submission to CMS. The data validation execution report includes an overall data error rate based on the identified data errors found during validation that were not corrected prior to data submission to CMS, number of clinicians, groups, and/or virtual groups supported, results of verifying accuracy of 10 NPIs, results of verifying MIPS eligibility for MIPS clinician groups and virtual groups, the results of verifying the calculation of the reporting and performance rates, the results of verifying 2021 MIPS quality measures, ECQMs, and/or QCDR measures for the performance period, the results of the randomized audit, and lastly, the results of the detailed audit if applicable. Additional information related to the data validation execution report will be conveyed to the QCDRs and qualified registries approved for the 2021 MIPS performance period. Next slide. CMS will evaluate the data submitted by QCDRs and qualified registries for completeness and accuracy, in addition to the information submitted within the 2021 DVR. If inaccurate, incomplete, or false data is found, CMS may also require remedial action up to and including termination from a QCDR or qualified registry for the current performance year and/or the subsequent performance year as applicable. CMS will further evaluate the QCDRs and qualified registries if any inaccurate, unusable, or otherwise compromised data affects clinicians, groups, or vulture groups for which the data was submitted by the third-party intermediary. CMS may evaluate data inaccuracies, including but not limited to 10 NPI mismatches, formatting issues, calculation errors, and data audit discrepancies affecting in excess of 3% of the total number of clinicians, groups, or vulture groups submitted. Examples of such errors include, for 10 NPI issues, the incorrect TINs or NPIs, or submission of group NPIs, formatting issues, submitting files with incorrect file formats or with incorrect element formats, or not updating and resubmitted rejected files. Regarding calculation issues, having incorrect qualities for measure elements, or incorrect performance rates, data completion rates, or numerators larger than denominators, and data audit discrepancies, vendor acknowledgement of data discrepancies found during data validation but not corrected in submissions, or vendor clinician acknowledgement of data discrepancies found post-submission from clinician feedback reports. Next slide. The calendar year 2020 Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule for Quality Payment Program provides CMS the ability to enforce remedial action or termination based on its determination that a third-party intermediary was not compliant with any applicable criteria, or if the third-party intermediary submitted data that are inaccurate, unusable, or otherwise compromised. Noncompliance with the timeline and/or late, incomplete, or absent deliverables may lead to remedial action up to and including termination as a third-party intermediary for the current and/or future performance periods. QCDRs and qualified registries requiring remedial action will be required to submit a corrective action plan to address any deficiencies and detail any steps taken to prevent them from recurring. The corrective action must include the following: issues that contributed to the noncompliance, impact to the individual clinicians, groups, and virtual groups, the corrective action implemented by the vendor to ensure that the noncompliance issues have been resolved and will not be repeated in the future, the timeline from the issue identification to resolution, and the resolution follow-up plan to communicate the final resolution and plan to monitor for future issues. Next slide. The qualified posting will be updated to reflect when remedial action is required or a vendor has been terminated. The table below shows an example of an updated qualified posting following remedial action and termination. Failure to comply with the remedial action process may lead to the termination for the current and/or subsequent performance periods. Next slide. As communicated in the calendar year 2020 Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule for the Quality Payment Program and 2021 QCDR and Qualified Registry fact sheet, support call attendance is mandatory. Failure to attend mandatory calls will result in remedial action up to and including termination being taken against the QCDR or Qualified Registry. Remedial action or termination as a third-party intermediary may carry over to future MIPS performance periods. Each QCDR and Qualified Registry must have at least one representative in attendance on every support call. One attendee may count for one QCDR and one qualified registry if an organization operates under each vendor type. One attendee will not count for multiple QCDRs or qualified registries. Next slide. CMS will also host virtual office hours to offer QCDRs and qualified registries an opportunity to ask CMS subject matter experts questions related to the assigned topics of those calls. Please note that only topic-specific questions will be addressed during each call. Other questions will be referred to the Quality Payment Program. Participation in the virtual office hour sessions is not required, but is strongly encouraged. Next slide. I will now turn the call over to Anastasia Robin to do the self-nomination form demonstration.
Thank you, Hector. Bear with me just one moment. I will get the platform shared. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Everyone should see my screen. If for some reason you can't, the folks on the phone will let me know here. So we will go ahead and demonstrate how to gain access to that self-nomination and how to populate and fill that information in. With that being said, to access the self-nomination, you will just navigate to qpp.cms.gov and sign in, which is up in the right-hand corner there. If for some reason you don't already have an account, there of course is information to register for an account, but we do want to designate today's call more on the actual process of self-nominating. If for some reason you need help obtaining an account or registering for an account, please follow that process, and there is Service Center information in there as well. So if you do already have an account, you'll type in your username, password information, indicate that you do agree to the statement of truth that is listed here, which will then venture you into an account. Now, I will tell you, based on the account that you have, the roles you've been granted, your screen may look very different from the one I'm showing. In addition, this is a test environment, so you may see slight modifications based on what is in this demonstration versus what will be in the production environment when it opens on July 1st. So, excuse me, as we are here in our account home, what we need to do is actually scroll down just a little bit to where you can see the option for Manage Access. If you select the Manage Access option, an additional option will pop up, and that option will reflect a Registry and QCDR self-nomination, so we will go ahead and click that. If you are an existing vendor that has participated in 2020, it is likely that you will already see vendors listed within your account. If for some reason you have not participated in the past, your screen will not populate various entries for self-nomination as you see on my screen here. It will be blank. At that point in time, if you do need to add a new vendor because you are a new vendor, we do need you to click the Add New Vendor button and then populate this information on the pop-up that comes up. You'll type in your vendor name and indicate whether you're planning to self-nominate as a qualified registry or a QCDR. One thing to note is if you do want to participate as both of those, you will need to submit 2 separate self-nominations. For the purpose of this demonstration, I've created a couple of sample self-nominations to go through, so I won't create a new vendor at this particular time, but once you do create one, you will see a line like this pop up reflective of the information you populated in that field. On another note, if for some reason you were an existing vendor and you do not see your vendor listed within the drop-down or within the list here, you can also click this Vendor Not Listed option, where there's all sorts of suggestions that you can go through to ensure that you do find your particular vendor that's associated to your unique ID. With that being said, on this home screen here, you'll see lots of information shared, so we'll cover a little bit of information here. We do have the organization name, which we've just for the purpose of this demo called an ABC QCDR. Next to it is the pencil, which you could edit that name should you wish to do so. The eyeball is actually a Manage Watchers option. We highly recommend all vendors populate this with additional folks. once you begin a self-nomination, only that person that began that self-nomination has access to the self-nomination at that point. If for some reason other folks within your team or your organization have access or an account to the system, you can certainly add their information to the Manage Watchers button, and they will now have access to the same self-nomination. This obviously is a beneficial tool in case for some reason somebody does go out of the office, or somebody may go on medical leave or something to that effect. We definitely want to make sure that at all times somebody can access that self-nomination in case something is needed. And then there's also the option to print, which does allow you to print your self-nomination in a complete form. We also show here that these self-nominations are new versions that I've created. If you are an existing vendor, you've already had a vendor ID assigned, and so it would actually have your vendor ID number here. However, for the purpose of this demo, these are new self-nominations. In addition, there's a self-nomination status, which reflects what type of status the actual self-nomination is in. You can see from these top two in the list here, the first one here, I have a draft in progress where I've completed about 84% of the self-nomination, whereas the one right below, the other ABC QCDR, is in self-nomination review, which means that it's been submitted to the team for review. So you can certainly pay attention to that to make sure that you do get a completely populated self-nomination form. We also want to note that there's an edit button, which we'll jump into here shortly to start editing the self-nomination that we will go through for this demo. And there's also a withdraw button. That should be used if, for example, you had thought you wanted to self-nominate but changed your mind, or maybe identified you didn't meet the requirements to participate as a vendor, or whatever it may be. If for some reason you no longer want to self-nominate, then you can just click this withdraw button and it will take you out of the consideration or the review process for consideration. With that being said, we'll go ahead and jump into the first self-nomination just to go through some of the information. As you see, when you go into a self-nomination, there is a window that does pop up that contains lots of information, instructions, as well as Paperwork Reduction Act information related to this particular process. We highly recommend that you review all of that information so that you do have those instructions and are understanding and comfortable with those. At the top of the screen here, you'll see very similar items that you saw on the last screen we were just on. You've got your vendor name. You can certainly edit that vendor name, manage your watchers, and print as well. A couple of additional things that have been added at the top here that I want to call out is there is a view and add comment box. That box is just an option where we can actually communicate back and forth directly in this self-nomination. We highly encourage all entities self-nominating to participate as a 2021 qualified QCDR or qualified registry. Pay note to these comments in here, as if for some reason something looks unusual in your self-nomination or isn't quite right for the purposes of us being able to accept the self-nomination. We will actually add a comment into this field here to ensure that you are able to get that information updated and sent back to us so that we could potentially accept that for consideration. To add a comment, it's as simple as just clicking the Add Comment button, typing in your comment, and then you do have the option to attach files should you wish to attach some type of a file. We also want to note that you can certainly select a subject, which we actually highly recommend because then it allows for the filtering of comments. If your comment is about a self-nomination, certainly select a self-nomination. If it's about qualified posting, select qualified posting, or whatever it happens to be. Once you've selected that, all you have to do is hit send, and it pops right up there and will notify us that you've provided a comment to us. The same happens when we provide a comment to you. The watchers on that particular self-nomination will receive an email saying that we have added a comment, but we of course just want to make sure that everyone pays note to these comments, as we do understand or have experienced in the past where some of our entities self-nominating may have had those direct emails from the system, filtered to the junk mail folder or whatever it happens to be. So just please make sure you're reviewing these comments and checking them just to make sure you got all the information needed. I do want to note just this little box on the the right-hand corner at the bottom here, the all subjects. This is where you would filter comments. Say for some reason in the future there may be 50 comments in here and you want to refer to only those ones related to self-nomination. This gives you the option to do so. Going back to the header of this, I also want to point out there is an option for where guides and help will be located. When the resources for self-nomination are posted out on the QPP Resource Library, which will be in the near future, you can certainly access them by navigating directly to the Resource Library, or we have included those resources as a link right here in the self-nomination, so you can easily navigate to those documents for resources. So those will be available. We also want to note that if for some reason you do want to reread those instructions that had popped up to the beginning of your self-nomination, you can certainly select to repopulate or repull up that About or Instructions section. There's also a workflow diagram should you wish to know how the flow of this process does work. We also want to note that over here on the right-hand corner, you'll see there's a little green section that says All Changes Saved. While we do have a save and close function in here, we are saving any changes you make to the document as you are making them, just to ensure that nothing is lost by any means. So there is an automatic save function, but of course, as you're completing your self-nomination or perhaps want to take a break, you can click that Save and Close option. That being said, we're going to go down into the actual part of the self-nomination now. As you can see from the left navigation panel here, we do have quite a few tabs of information we do need populated by the vendors that are planning to self-nominate. I do want to note that the ones that are located or that are noted with a green check mark are actually tabs that I've already completed for the purpose of this demo. The ones in yellow you can see are in progress at this point in time, and the ones still white are indicated as a not started. That's a helpful tool for anyone self-nominating so they can see which tabs still need some work before they submit. So you can certainly reference that information as you go through. In addition, you'll see down here the Submit for Review button is actually not an option at this point in time because the complete form is not ready to be submitted. So once we complete the form, that button will become activated. But just as on the other screen, we do have the withdraw option here as well. So now we'll start going through the content here. On the vendor contact information, we do want to note that this is kind of the demographic tab that we collect all sorts of addresses, email addresses, things like that for the particular vendor self-nominating. So we'll start at the top here. We'll collect your organization name. If for some reason you have a QCDR name and a separate organization name, then we suggest that you type that in here. If for some reason it is the same, you could just let us know that it's the same. And then we have a spot to collect the organization TIN. As you can tell, I have a test TIN in here. But we do collect that for the purposes of identifying you, especially within submissions. And then we do ask if you are planning to self-nominate as both a QCDR and a qualified registry, and ask that you just put yes or no. That way we can track accordingly. The next field here is the vendor staff access. This is an extra field here that if for some reason you want to add those additional folks you haven't already added underneath the managed watchers, you can go ahead and add them here at this field, and then they'll have access to the self-nomination as well. In the information below here, we collect the vendor address, phone number, website, and then contact information that should be included in any of our distribution lists. So you'll see here, this is the program contact information. This would be your program contact, the program name, phone number, email address. We also collect the same information for the clinical contact as well as the technical contact. And we do require that each of those individuals be separate individuals. So you will find that if you type in the same email address across two of those fields, it will require you to update. Moving down to the additional contacts, this is just a field where if for some reason above and beyond the 3 that are listed above, you want more contacts added to the distribution list to receive information directly from us as well as appointments for our support calls, those emails should be included here. As when we create the 2021 self-nomination contact list, we will use any email addresses from this specific self-nomination. So please include as many as you feel are beneficial. That being said, we'll go ahead and move to the next tab. As you can see, it's a green circle there, so we'll go ahead and move to the next tab. And we'll be on the vendor details tab, so we'll collect some details about the specific vendor, the first one being the vendor type. We ask what type of vendor you are, a collaborative, health IT vendor, an HIE, RHIO, regional health collaborative, specialty society, whatever you may be. If you're some other type of vendor, please describe what that may be in the field. That way we can identify what type of a vendor you are. The next field here is the MIPS PQRS participation. If you're a new vendor and haven't participated as a vendor for MIPS or PQRS, you can go ahead and click next, or I'm sorry, new. If you are an existing vendor, then we ask that you populate the drop-down and let us know. So this self-nomination is for a QCDR. We would ask you to populate and click any of these fields for which you participated as a QCDR for that particular year. The next field here is about an alias. So we do have all sorts of acronyms and aliases that our vendors may use. We ask that you just type them in here, as certain times you'll refer to yourself as a different name we're not used to, or perhaps an acronym we're not used to, and this will help us identify exactly which vendor that acronym or alias belongs to. If you don't have any type of an acronym, feel free to just let us know that you don't have an acronym or an alias. Moving on to the next item here, QCDR clinical specialties. This is QCDR specific, so only the QCDRs will actually have to populate this field. Qualified registries will not see this particular section on their self-nomination. So as a QCDR, just type in what type of specialties you support here. If there's 3 different specialties, type all 3. If for some reason you're non-specific to a specialty, just put all specialties if you'd like. The next section, again, only QCDR specific. Do you plan to submit QCDR measures? It's a simple yes or no answer. And the next one is, do you plan to risk adjust any of those measures? If you do plan to risk adjust those measures, we do ask that you upload a risk adjustment plan so that we can also review that information. The next section here is also just QCDR specific. So again, you will not see this on the registry, the qualified registry self-nomination. But this section here is a section to identify how each person or each entity self-nominating to be a QCDR for 2021 meets the definition of a QCDR. So while I've just typed generic information in these boxes, we do want to note that we ask you to populate all of the necessary information to prove to CMS exactly why you do have the necessary clinical expertise, measure development experience. On this next one here, we do understand that at certain times, an organization may have a technical platform or a clinical organization they have partnered with or collaborated with to meet that definition. That is absolutely fine, but we ask that you let us know that in this particular field. We also ask how you do any type of patient and or disease tracking, as well as fostering any quality improvement. The last field here, this last field here is if for some reason you had previously been indicated as a vendor who has not met the definition of a QCDR, what we want you to type in here is how you've altered your organization or collaborated perhaps with another organization to meet those identified deficiencies that were previously communicated to you as not meeting the definition of QCDR. So you would type in that information here. With that being said, I want to note that, as you can tell here, we're still at an in progress, but we've come to the bottom. So I just want to say, until you get to a green portion, then you definitely want to just keep scrolling through to make sure that you have everything populated that you need populated. So that was our change there. And as you can see, we went ahead and moved to green. Moving on to the next tab, again with this information, we'll actually use this tab to collect information for what will in the future be posted on the CMS website on what's called a qualified posting, which is a list of the CMS approved QCDRs and qualified registries. So within this tab, we'll ask for what type of cost information your clients incur. We do ask that when you do give the cost information, you do provide the dollar amount as well as what that applies to. Is that per clinician, per group, per virtual group? And when is it, how long is that good for? Is it per year? Is it per an episode? You know, all of our vendors have a variety of ways they charge their clients for these services. So however you do charge them, we want that information here. Additionally, we require that you let us know what type of services are included in that cost that you are providing that's referenced above. The last date accepting new clients is the next field here. We do want to note that the performance period for 2021 is January 1st of 2021 through December 31st of 2021. So it is imperative that you pick a date applicable for that year. You know, you obviously don't want to probably stop signing on clinicians tomorrow in 2020. We want to make sure that we have an appropriate date for the actual 2021 performance period as to when the last day you can accept any new clients is. We'll keep moving down. The next item here is the data collection method. This field will just identify to CMS how you're going to collect data from your clinicians. It could be claims, EHRs, practice management systems, any or all of them. Of course, if there is some other mechanism, we will ask you to type out some type of explanation of what the other does represent. So you can do one, you can select all. The next field is the performance categories reported. We do want to note that the quality and improvement activities are actually already checked on the entity's behalf, as those are required. All 2021 entities that are participating as a QCDR qualified registry will be required to support quality and improvement activities. Promoting interoperability, we do have that checked, but it does have the option to uncheck, as in the physician fee schedule rule, there was an exception noted. So we do note that there are some folks who will meet the exception for that. And I should note that if for some reason you have questions about that, there is of course, information in the rule, as I noted, but also a tip right here on this particular field to let folks know information about that exception. If for some reason you do find yourself or feel that you do meet that exception and uncheck that box, of course, the CMS team may have additional questions for you on that perspective just to ensure you do meet that exception, but we will note that through our review process. The next field here is the reporting options supported. You may select any or all of these. At least one, of course, needs to be selected, so you may decide to support individual clinicians, groups, virtual groups, and APM entities. I will note that if you do select virtual groups, we do ask that you put in what type of specialties you're planning to support for the virtual groups. Moving on to the next tab, we go to the attestations. Within this tab is a lot of the information Hector just discussed in the presentation, so I won't go through these one by one. However, we do collect attestations during self-nomination to basically ensure that anybody self-nominating meets all of these participation requirements. So there's a few things listed here, and then specific attestations that we require each vendor to go through and click, yes, I attest that I meet this requirement. As you can see, the only option for these is yes for all of the requirements listed here. As a vendor who would click no on any of these would not meet the requirements to be a 2021 QCDR or qualified registry. So if for some reason somebody clicks no, they wouldn't be able to participate anyways. So please review those requirements, ensure that you are able to meet those requirements, and then click yes. And then at the bottom, we have just kind of an extra set here to say, yes, we do meet all of these requirements and attest that we can comply with them. Moving on to the next tab, we'll go to improvement activities. I do want to note that these next couple of tabs, the improvement activities, promoting interoperability, MIPS clinical quality measures, which are also known as CQMs, and then the MIPS ECQMs are very similar in function. So I'll spend a little bit more time on this first one here, but the functionality is the same across all of these. These tabs are where you're going to elect what improvement activities, promoting interoperability measures, CQMs and ECQMs you're electing to support for the 2021 performance period. I do want to note that we understand that the calendar year 2021 physician fee schedule final rule for the quality payment program has not obviously been finalized at this point in time. So the information in the self-nomination is based on the 2020 rule at this time. Once the rule is finalized, any CMS approved QCDR or qualified registry will have one last chance to kind of take a look at the activities and measures they've selected and identify if there's any they need to remove because maybe a measure was retired, or add in case any were proposed. So you will have that option during the qualified posting review process. So that will occur after the final rules available. In order to select a improvement activity, you would come down here to the lower part of the screen and you see you can either just elect that you're going to support all improvement activities supported. You can select some, which as you can see, a drop-down menu will populate, and you can select as many as you plan to support. And of course, there's obviously the option of none, but as we've referenced earlier, all QCDRs and qualified registries are required to be able to support improvement activities. So if you select none there, we will be asking you some additional clarifying questions. I do want to note we have added a link here in case for some reason anybody does want to reference any type of view activity description for those improvement activities that are listed. Moving on to the next tab of promoting interoperability. As you can tell, same format here. And the same applies that changes may be made in the 2021 PFS rule. So again, you'll have the opportunity to update that during the qualified posting review process, but for the purpose of the self-nomination, you will again select all, some, or none. With that being said, of course, we also have included the link for view measure descriptions should you have questions about any of these promoting interoperability measures that are available in the drop-down here.
Hey, Anastasia, I wanted to add one additional point before you move on, just to clarify for those that are new. Promoting interoperability, the requirement is there for you that all QCDRs and registries must support PI for 2021. The clarification I want to make is that there are certain specialties or certain clinician types that are exempt from PI, and that is where we would allow that exception. If your QCDR or registry focuses solely on a specialty that is exempt from PI reporting, then you will be allowed to bypass this requirement. If you support multiple specialties or specialties that are not exempt from PI, you will be required to support this.
Thanks, Sophia. Appreciate that. Okay, let's see. So we've completed our promoting interoperability tab here. We'll go ahead and move on to the next tab, which is those MIPS clinical quality measures, again, also known as CQMs. As you can see, the format, again, the same, but I do want to note extra on this that each QCDR and qualified registry is required to report a minimum of 6 measures, and 1 must be an outcome measure. So as you're submitting measures, please make sure you at least have 6 and 1 outcome. Of course, those 6 measures can be across the CQMs, they can be ECQMs, they can also be partly made up of QCDR measures if for some reason you are supporting QCDR measures for 2021. So it doesn't just have to be on this tab, but we will look for 6 measures and 1 outcome measure. Again, with this one, what's in the list will apply to the 2020 Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule. However, again, you will have the opportunity to review during the qualified posting process to see if you have any additions or removals. With that being said, again, you'll select all, some, or none. If you select some, again, you'll select all of the measures you wish to support for that particular performance period. And again, we do have the link to be able to view the measure descriptions related to these particular measures. Moving on to the MIPS ECQMs. As you can see, again, similar format. I will note that the 2021 ECQMs have been finalized, so the drop-down menu will be based on the 2021 measures, as those are in a separate process. However, we do still give you the opportunity during the qualified posting review process to double check those CQMs. But again, with this, for self-nomination purposes, you'll select all, some, or none, and then of course view the descriptions as you may need to do. Moving on to the next tab, this is our data validation plan tab. What we ask for the vendors to do here is let us know how you're going to validate the data that you're collecting from your clinicians, groups, virtual groups, and APM entities to ensure that you are submitting true, accurate, and complete data. I know Hector touched on that earlier, but this is right where we'll collect this information to ensure that you are validating the appropriate information. So on this tab, we will ask how your organization will verify the clinicians, groups, virtual groups, and APM entities' eligibilities, to ensure they're either MIPS eligible, potentially an opt-in clinician, or even a voluntary reporter. So we will expect that information there. The next one is how you'll verify the accuracy of TIN and NPI combinations. We obviously want to make sure that the data being submitted is attributed to the correct TIN number and correct NPI number of the clinician and or group, virtual group, APM entity that you're planning to submit for. So that's why we collect that information here. The next one is that you'll be validating the reporting rates and performance rates that you are processing data on behalf for them. So we'll double check to make sure you do not have any issues with those calculations. The next one is to double check or validate that you are using the correct versions of the measures and specifications. We often see where perhaps a clinician or a vendor misunderstood a measure or an activity, or perhaps didn't pull the most recent version of the specification, or perhaps tried to report on a retired measure that was retired based on the final rule. So in this field, we just want to make sure that the vendors are validating to ensure that the correct measures, the correct activities, and the correct versions of those specifications for each are being utilized and processed appropriately. The next few fields here are a randomized and a detailed audit. I will note here the randomized audit does require, as you can see from the tooltip here, does require that each of our vendors sample at least 3% of the TIN and NPIs they submit to CMS. They do allot for a minimum of 10, a maximum of 50, but do require that a randomized audit of those clinicians be done. Within that randomized audit of those clinicians, they do require that at least 25% of the TINs and NPIs patients be audited further with a minimum sample of 5, maximum of 50. And those should be reviewed for all measures applicable to the patient. So that's just to ensure, again, that true, accurate, and complete data is being submitted to CMS. This next one here then is a detailed audit. For the purpose of the detailed audit, if you find anything in the randomized audit, we will require a detailed audit. The detailed audit is something that will audit just a larger sample size of what the randomized audit did, as well as do a root cause analysis to make sure that all additional errors, related to what was found, have also been found and fixed prior to submitting any data to CMS, as CMS, of course, wants to process the true, accurate, and complete data for the purposes of MIPS. We'll go ahead and move on to the next tab. These next two tabs, I will note, are specific to QCDRs. So again, you will not see these if you are self-nominating to participate as a qualified registry. If a QCDR, though, you will see these and they will be required for you to populate. Benchmarking capabilities, this tab right here. So we are asking here if you do have the ability to benchmark. And if so, we do ask that you upload your benchmarking plan. I'm just going to click no just for the purpose of turning this green here, but we would request that you populate that form. Moving on to the next tab here, it's QCDR measures. Now, we do understand that not every QCDR is going to submit QCDR measures. However, if you do, you will need to use the appropriate QCDR measure template to populate this information and submit it in your self-nomination. The next portion of our demonstration will actually cover that as soon as I close up here, so I won't get into too much detail on that at this point in time. But I do want to note that you'll just upload your QCDR measure template in a completed form here, and then you will also have to populate these fields below based on the QCDR measures you're supporting. So we want to know that if you are proposing any QCDR measures for 2021, are any of those measures owned by another QCDR? If so, do you have permission to report those measures from the owner of that QCDR measure? So if you own all of them, then you can just hit no and it's good to go. If for some reason you do click yes, then we will expect that you will put documentation of the approval. That way we can prove that, of course, yep, ABC vendor gave, DEF vendor the approval to report their particular measures. So what I'm going to do real quick here, just upload a quick file here. So that way we can go ahead and turn our field to the appropriate. Oh, it doesn't want to upload for me. Well, for the purposes, since it doesn't want to upload for me here, we'll just go ahead and change our response of supporting QCDR measures back to a no, so that we won't have to populate that field. If for some reason you aren't supporting QCDR measures, you won't have to populate the QCDR measure tab. Let me jump back to that though. Okay, so as you can see, we're not supporting any QCDR measures, so we don't need to populate anything on this QCDR measure tab. And as you can see, there's no other tabs to go to at this point in time. We'll do a quick double check, and we have completed every single tab on here. Now, we do understand, of course, some vendors may want to take a look and re-review their information. Feel free to bounce around in the different tabs to ensure that you've got all of the appropriate information you need. Once you are, though, ready to submit it to the CMS and PIMS team for review, you can see that this option down here has now become active. So you can now submit for review. If you do decide to submit for review, you can click that button and you'll see that there is just a confirmation box that does pop up for your confirmation. So we'll just hit yes, we plan to submit it, and now we have confirmation that we have submitted it successfully. And that'll be our cue between the CMS and the PIMS team to double check or to go up there and start reviewing your self-nomination to ensure that you do meet the requirements and we have all of the components necessary for you to be a 2021 self-nomination. Of course, if we find any issues, have any questions or concerns, we'll give you those comments in the Q&A box at that particular time. So I do want to just mention here real fast that now that we've submitted that self-nomination, you can see this top one here is the one we just used for the demonstration. It is now in self-nomination review. So it's with the team for review. Pay note to the comments. And again, you should receive an email confirmation that this has been submitted, as well as if for some reason we add any comments. If for some reason you don't get that email from the system when you have submitted it for review, we would highly recommend you to check with your spam filter or your junk folder and then mark that as a safe mark that as a safe email to ensure that you get all future instances of any emails being sent. So with that, being said, I do want to just quickly note again the resources for this particular demo that I completed will be available soon on the QPP resource library, and in that is a step-by-step user guide. So if you'd prefer a one-step, two-step, three-step type of documentation process, that will be available for self-nomination and easily accessible, so you can reference that as you're processing your own should you need additional help. With that being said, that concludes this portion of my demonstration, so I will turn the screen back over for the team to start going over the QCDR measure slides and then into a demonstration to talk about how to submit QCDR measures.
Thanks, Anastasia. So I'm going to be discussing the QCDR measure submission template. Next slide, please. As it's been noted, this only refers to the QCDR measures that will be submitted. You do have to use our 2021 QCDR measure submission template. This is the only approved format in which to submit your QCDR measures. There's a couple different ways you can access it. One, for the QCDRs in good standing. They've talked about a simplified self-nom that's been partially filled out. Then there will be an uploaded template with your 2020 approved and provisionally approved measures. It'll be filled out as much as possible. And then if you are new to QCDR measure submission, you can access a blank 2021 QCDR measure submission template in that self-nomination toolkit that's been referenced. Here are some basic suggestions as you start to work through the QCDR measure submission template. It is an Excel format. If you're going to be using a QCDR measure owned by another QCDR, you must have documentation of permission to use another active QCDR's measure. This does mean that the QCDR measure must be owned by a QCDR that is in good standing and active within the program. Only limited information is required in the template for a borrowed QCDR measure. As we go through the actual template, you'll see the shading that will denote where the measure owner specifications will be used. Previously approved QCDR measures can be withdrawn from consideration by updating the QCDR measure status to withdrawn. And this is actually program submission status that we'll see on that Excel template. Next slide, please. Pre-populated templates will contain blanks for columns new to the 2021 template. We do ask you that you use the standardized language in our drop-down selections, just so that we can have standardization across all the entries. If a QCDR measure has a change that does not impact the intent of the measure, it is still important to note that change to aid in review. You need to verify that the meaningful measure area selected meets the intent of that area as applied to your QCDR measure. You need to make sure that all of the measure analytics, inverse, proportional, all those things must be correctly applied to your QCDR measure. And we do have a notes column that is a miscellaneous catch-all column where you can document anything that you feel like you didn't have another place to document that within the template. You can put notes about collaboration efforts as you try to resolve areas of duplication, anything else that you feel like needs to be noted by the PIMS team and CMS as they review your measure. And then last but not least, please perform spelling and grammar checks and correct any identified items. We really want you to do an internal QA or quality assurance as you review your QCDR measures. Well, now I'll be accepting the screen as a presenter. It will take just a moment. All right. I believe that my screen is being shared. Okay, so you have an Excel spreadsheet as we discussed. There are 3 tabs. When you open your template, you should be able to, it should be open to this first tab, which is the instructions tab. And we really tried to limit our instructions to just the things that are really important for you to know as you go through the process of filling out this template with your QCDR measures. As with everything else, we would prefer that you read the instructions before you start, but we have a way for you to refer back to this tab that I will show you. When you download the QCDR measure submission template, we ask you to save it with a basic nomenclature of 2021 QCDR measure submission underscore your QCDR name underscore with the version history. So as you update measures, if you have to add a new measure, anything like that, you realized you had done QA again and you realized there was an error and you need to re-upload it, we prefer that you maintain version history so we'll know that we are looking at the most recent and current version. As with self-nomination, the last date and time to be able to enter or submit QCDR measures is that 8 p.m. Eastern Time on September 1st. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the actual template. So here on the Instructions tab, you'll see this first column, and it is a hyperlink that will take you over to this 2021 QCDR Measure Submission Template tab. I'll just be referring to this tab from now on as the template. Each of the column titles are actually hyperlinks back to the instructions page. So that's a really easy way to jump back and forth between the template and this instructions. If you're wondering, what was I supposed to enter in this column, you'll see examples, good information on what needs to be done. Several of the columns or each column has a whether or not it's required. This NA indicates that it's actually internal use only and you don't have to enter anything. Required, as you'll see here, column E, when you get over to here, you'll notice that it does have an asterisk at the end of the column title. So that denotes that it is a required field. There are optional fields as well, and those are usually because they're based on the answer that you placed in a prior column, or it could be that it's just if you do have the information or data available that we ask that you insert it there, and if you don't, then you can leave it blank or enter NA. The second tab is the QCDR information tab. And your QCDR, you will only fill out these first 4 lines or rows. The last 4 rows, as you'll see here, are shaded, which indicates that you don't need to do anything with them. Your organization name, your vendor ID, and then as you initiate that self-nomination ticket in the QPP website, the self-nomination tool, you'll be assigned a ticket number, and we ask that you put that here so we can reference back to that. And then if you could also include the expected number of QCDR measures that you're going to submit. So for example, you're going to submit 10 measures. What's going to happen as you go to the template tab and start entering those measures, these are going to be just a quick quality assurance place for us to make sure that we reconcile how many measures you think or how many measures you said you were going to self-nominate. Then we can make sure that there are 10 present and that they all have all of the required information present as well. So one of the things the PIMS team has done, and at the behest of CMS, is that we really want to pay attention to what vendors are requesting, what their feedback is, and to make this tool as user-friendly as possible. We do know that Excel has some limitations, but we really try to work through those to make sure that we make it the best possible experience for you. So one of the suggestions that was made was that it was very difficult because of the length of this spreadsheet was to maintain a reference point across a row to make sure that you know which measure you're entering data for all the way across the spreadsheet. So what we have done is this is an auto-filled cell that will occur once you enter information. So column I here is requesting if this is a previously CMS approved measure, please provide the CMS assigned measure ID. So let's say that this is PIMS 1 for us. And then when you get to the measure title, we'll just say that this is a test measure. If you'll see as I hit enter, this became auto-filled with the measure ID and the measure title. So now as you scroll across this row, you have a stationary reference point to make sure that you are entering the correct data for this measure. If this is a new measure, for example, so it doesn't have an assigned ID, it'll just change to pending CMS measure ID, but you'll still have the measure title to reference. We really appreciate the feedback because we think this is really going to be helpful. One of the other concerns that was expressed by a vendor was that these first 3 columns that are internal use only, or first 4 now, took up too much screen room as you were trying to fill out the spreadsheet. So there are a couple of options that you can do. Now, if you'd like, you can, for example, make the column smaller so it doesn't take up as much space, or you can actually even hide the columns. But these are for a purpose. Maybe column A can be hidden and remain hidden for you guys since it is just a tracking ID for internal use only. But these next 2 columns, B and C, really help you know if you're missing any required fields. And so that was the purpose, was to let you know if anything was missing. And then again, we just discussed column D. So, do you own this measure? If you answer no, that you obtained permission and documentation is available upon request, if you'll look across, then there becomes some red shaded areas. These shaded areas indicate that this is what's going to have the measure owner specifications. You can write on top of this. And answer what you will, but once the measure owner has finalized their measure for 2021, this will be overwritten with their specifications. But there are areas that are not shaded. So for example, primary data source used for abstraction. Let's say the measure owner uses the EHR to abstract their data, but you don't have access to that, and you're going to have to use, let's say, a paper medical record. You do have the option in a few of these fields to tailor it to your QCDR, even if it is a borrowed measure. Program submission status. We realized last year, let me tell you about this. Row 1 really is a way to tell if it's a column title change for 2021, if you're familiar with the 2020 template, and this will indicate if things have changed or been added. So program submission status, last year we realized that we had 2 columns titled the exact same thing, measure type. But what measure type really indicates is if it's a process measure, an outcome measure, etc. So we changed the title of this column to program submission status. And what this is referring to is if it's a new QCDR measure, that's been combined within a QCDR, like a QCDR had multiple QCDR measures that they combined into one single QCDR measure, or if it's an existing approved QCDR measure with no changes or with changes. All right, so as we go across here, you will just basically be filling out each cell. Again, you can reference back and forth to instructions tab, measure title, measure description, etc. I hope I'm not making anybody dizzy. And then we get to one of our first changes from 2020. So care settings, Excel does have a limitation of accepting multiple choices within a drop-down list unless you're doing advanced macros or programming. So what we did was we made an option of selecting, of course you can select any of these, home care for example, but if you have multiple care settings, you can select multiple care settings, and then you'll list those here in column AB. Due to the current situation in our healthcare systems, many providers have really had to go to, or eligible clinicians groups and virtual groups, they've all had to go to telehealth encounters. And so CMS is really wanting to know whether or not your QCR measure includes telehealth coding so that it can accept data from telehealth encounters. This is just a yes or no answer. And this is also going to be beneficial for your eligible clinicians that maybe have gone to almost exclusive telehealth encounters and they still want to be able to participate with quality measures that apply to them. These are all of the analytics that we talked about, inverse, risk adjusted, etc. This column AP is one of the most important columns. And this is stating, is the QCR measure able to be abstracted? And when we go over here to the instructions, what you're saying when you answer yes or no is that you are attesting that the measure element can be extracted and is feasible. If borrowing the measure, it is expected that the ability to abstract the data according to the QCDR measure owner specifications is a condition of self-nominating the QCDR measure. Withdrawing of the QCR measure during an active performance period is not acceptable. So what we found is that QCR may look at the numerator and denominator and think, yeah, we can abstract this measure. But then once they really dig into it, get to the coding, they come to the realization that they're not able to. So we really ask that before, and even for a measure owner, you want to make sure that you can actually abstract the data. So in the 2020 final rule, CMS had stated that QCR measures were going to need it to be tested at the clinician level. But again, referring back to our current healthcare environment with the pandemic and the burden on the providers, this has been delayed until 2022. So again, it is not required. As you can see here, there is not a asterisk at the end of the column title. But we know that some QCDRs had already initiated some of the testing needed for the measures. And so we wanted to provide you an opportunity to be able to document that. And if you do have any of that information already available, we strongly encourage you to enter that for our team's review. This is another new one for 2021. This is one of the requirements that was listed in 2020 for 2021 that is going to be continued as being required this year. And you need to describe a link to a cost measure and an improvement activity. If there is no link identified, you can document that. And CMS is considering exceptions if the potential QCR measure otherwise meets the QCR measure requirements and considerations. Clinical recommendation statement, basic information here. Performance data. Again, this was initially going to be required for 2021, but it has been pushed to 2022. So again, this is not required, but we all know that many QCRs have already collected data, even if it wasn't being reported to the MIPS program or the quality payment program. But we still would like for you to include any data that you do have available. One of the elements that we have requested for this year and moving forward is to also include the number of months the data is collected. This is a new field or a new data point in addition to the average performance rate, performance range, and number of clinicians or groups. This last column, QCR notes, we talked about that for a moment during the slides. This is your miscellaneous area that you can put any other information that you feel like you weren't able to really tell us the story about why you have a great QCR measure, you have any data to support it, anything like that. These last 4 columns, which are green, are our communication columns that as we go through the QCR measure decision review, as CMS makes the decisions on whether or not to approve, provisionally approve, reject the measure, etc. This is how we will communicate back to you as the QCDR. There's also opportunities for reconsideration regarding a decision if you have new information or new data available that you wanted us to reconsider the decision. And then there is also a final CMS measure decision for that measure. I hope this demonstration has been helpful. I think we are going to be having a question and answer session, and we'll be available to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for your time.
All right, is Hector on the line to cover this section?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, sorry about that. So I'll go over the resources and who to call for help, these last couple of slides. Next slide. So some key websites for you to use as a resource are the Quality Payment Program website, the QPP Participation Status Lookup Tool, the MIPS Explore Measures Tool, the QPP Resource Library and Webinar Library, the QPP Help and Support page, and we also highly encourage you to enlist for the QPP listserv, which is also available on the Quality Payment Program website, to receive updates and announcements regarding the Quality Payment Program. Next slide. If you need assistance or to contact the Quality Payment Program, you may do so at the email and phone number listed on the slide. Please note that emails must be sent directly, not forwarded or copied, and must utilize the Quality Payment Program email address in the to line. Inquiries forwarded or sent to the Quality Payment Program in the copy line will not trigger the creation of a case number for your inquiry. To ensure that inquiries are routed to the appropriate subject matter experts, all inquiries must be submitted to the Quality Payment Program and not the QCDR or Qualified Registry Vendor Support mailbox. Next slide. For technical assistance, you may also contact the small and solo practice support contractor, so Impact. And you may also get technical support for eligible clinicians at the information provided on the screen, and also at the email provided at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. We're also looking for participants to collaborate with us and provide feedback related to qpp.cms.gov for educational materials, website content, website design, reporting, eligibility, and performance feedback. The QPP research teams invite you to participate in the human-centered design efforts. So their sessions range from 30 to 60 minutes, and you can join by phone or webinar. If you're interested, you can send an email with your name, title, and topic of interest to qppuserresearch@cms.hhs.gov. Next slide. Okay. And now we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Hector. All right, to ask a question, you can do so either through the phone line or through the chat box on your screen. So if you'd like to submit your question to be asked aloud, please do so by submitting it through the chat box. Otherwise, you can raise the green hand icon on your go-to menu, and we will unmute your line so you can ask a question live. All right, so until we get a few phone questions in, your first question, speakers ask, can you please explain the required link for a cost measure and quality activity?
Sorry, this is Sophia, and I was double muted. Sorry about that. Yes, I can explain that. So this is specific to QCDR measures, and also it is a requirement of MIPS quality measures moving forward, that you link your measure to an existing improvement activity or cost measure as it's available. We're really looking as we make additional progress in the program, as you may all be aware of, the transforming MIPS framework that we had previously finalized in the 2020 rule, progressing forward in having more meaningful measurement. So what we're looking for is for measures and activities across the performance categories to have complementary relationships to one another, which is why we're looking for you to then, create QCDR measures that have relatable cost measures and or improvement activities to kind of create these relationships. We're really looking with, the transforming MIPS framework and the move to MIPS value pathways to really have coherent sets of measures and activities that are meaningful and relevant. And in order to do that, we think that establishing these links and relationships between the measures and activities will, help us progress in that direction.
Great, thank you. All right, we do have a question on the phone from Carmen Penna. So Carmen, we'll unmute your line now. All right, Carmen, you may go ahead and ask your question. Carmen Penna, you're unmuted and may ask your question. All right, Carmen, are you there? All right, we'll go back to questions from the chat box. Your next question asks, are there measures that do not need permission to be used?
Currently, QCDR measures are the only instance. Sorry to go. QCDR measures are the only instance where you must seek permission from the QCDR measure owner. The way those are approved are in a manner that is outside of our typical rulemaking process. So the measures, if you are opting to select measures that are approved and finalized through notice and comment rulemaking, those are measures you would select from our MIPS quality measures inventory. So you can go ahead and do that as a part of your application. I believe Anastasia had walked you through the drop-down menu that's available for you to select measures. And again, with that, the expectation is that you support at least 6 measures. One of them must be an outcomes measure or another high priority measure in order to meet the quality reporting requirements for the MIPS program. If you select less than 6, the team will come back to you and ask you to add more measures. So as a QCDR, you can also choose to either self-nominate your own QCDR measures or opt to seek permission and borrow measures from other QCDR measure owners. So if you do that, that is completely fine. We ask that you have permission in place as you self-nominate the measures. We will validate that you had received permission from that measure owner before we approve your use of that measure.
Great, thank you. All right, your next question asks, just popped up, is there a sandbox or test environment available before we submit the production data?
I don't think we have subject matter experts on from the product team to help with that question. That is one that I would direct towards the QPP Reservice Center to get an answer. I do believe they have the sandbox of sorts, but I'm not as familiar with it. So to get an appropriate SME to answer that would be the best option.
Great, thank you. All right, next, where can we find details about what is required for the validity, feasibility, and reliability summaries? Previously, we were directed to Blueprint, but that is clearly for NQF endorsements and for a much greater level of requirements than seems to be required for QCDR measures.
Right. So in the previous rule for 2020, we finalized the measure testing requirement to begin with 2021. We did, through the interim final rule that just came out probably sometime last month, did delay those requirements until 2022 in light of the public health emergency and our current state of events. And so the 2020 rule did reference the blueprint and our efforts to not deter and create a substandard level of requirements or create a separate standard of requirements, which would then lead to confusion. We did receive some feedback from our QCDRs as to additional clarity that's needed, and so we anticipate providing additional guidance in the upcoming physician fee schedule rule, which again, because we delayed this requirement, would not go into effect until 2022. So that guidance is forthcoming.
Great, thank you. All right, next, can you please explain the role that QCDRs can play to support APMs?
If an APM entity opts to report through the MIPS program, we are now allowing them to do so utilizing a QCDR or Qualified Registry. I believe in previous years that option was not available. So now we are expanding their options of ways they can report should they choose to report through MIPS. And so our intent here is that we want to first provide this as an option to the QCDRs and registries to then let us know that they are willing to support this option or not. And if so, and so if they are, if you do opt to select to support APM entities, we would list that in your qualified posting once that's published, and that will let those entities know, when they go to select the QCDR or registry for reporting, who is available to them and able to support APM entity reporting. There are not separate criteria or standards for APM reporting. Our thought is that they would be considered to our existing standards of what is required for group and individual reporting. It is just that we want to be clear to those entities which QCDRs and registries are able to support them.
Great. All right, as a reminder to everybody on the line today, we do have the phone lines open. So if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please just raise your green hand icon on your go-to menu and we can unmute your line. Right. Otherwise, your next question asks, during the qualified posting review process, can any changes be made or any changes limited to once due to changes in the final rule?
So we do have a process for you to review and approve your qualified posting once your self-nomination has been accepted, and you will receive communications from the PIMS team to walk you through that process. And in reviewing that draft, you'll be able to make changes. Once the qualified posting is finalized, there are instances where we allow for you to add additional measures, and that has been an annual process that we have allowed. We don't make updates to the qualified posting, but we do allow our vendors to add additional measures and activities based off of their further review of the existing inventory of measures. We do not allow you to remove, which is why I do, for the new vendors or new entities wishing to self-nominate as a QCDR registry, emphasize that you should, be very wary of what you are selecting to report and, are confident that you can support that before selecting it and finalizing your qualified posting. Once it's on there, you will be held to it. You will not be able to remove it. And that goes for not just the measures and activities, but the types of entities you wish to support, groups and individuals, and any other information that's listed on that qualified posting. Once it's there, it will, and it's published on our CMS website, we will not be taking it down to remove any kind of language or text from it. So my advice for those that are self-nominating for the first time, granted we have a large inventory of measures and activities to choose from, is specifically for quality to at least select 6 measures. If you want to add more after that, once you've been approved, we do have a time frame that allows you to do so, but to focus in and make sure you have at least 6 measures that you've vetted through completely and are confident that you can support, because once you've listed measures and anything else on your qualified posting, you'll be held to that. So to at least give you that step in the right direction, I would highly suggest that you at a minimum start with those 6 measures that you are confident with. But hopefully that helps.
Great, thanks. All right, next, based on the guidance forthcoming in the 2021 proposed and final rules related to QCDR measure testing, would it behoove QCDR measure developers to hold on measure testing, or should we begin the process now, as this is a very heavy lift for measure owners?
That is, I would say, to your discretion. I don't think it's for us to say when you should or should not start measure testing. I guess that would depend on you. Again, we will be providing additional guidance through the physician fee schedule rules. So if you could possibly at least wait till the NPRM's out, that will at least provide you a high-level indication of what our thoughts are. Again, since that's not finalized, I can't guarantee that's the direction we go in, but that will at least give you an idea of our thoughts of how we would approach testing in future years. But again, the decision is left to you as the measure developer as to when you want to start your testing. Some have already started, and we certainly don't want to take away from that.
Great. Okay, as a reminder, we do have a bit more time on the webinar left, so if you have a question, please feel free to submit it via the chat box on your screen, or you can raise your hand to ask a question over the phone line. We'll wait for a few more questions, but in the meantime, we'll go over a few frequently asked questions that may have already been answered throughout the webinar. So, Sophia, can you please clarify if we are already an EHR submission vendor, for 2020, would this meet the requirements?
Yeah, that was a question that I don't know if it was related to a specific requirement in a slide or if it was generally talking about meeting the criteria of being a QCDR registry. So I took the liberty of answering it from the perspective of if a health being an EHR submission vendor would meet the requirements of or equate to the requirements of a QCDR and registry, to which I said no. And I referred the questionnaire to future resources that will be published, the self-nomination toolkit, which will include the fact sheets and a lot of information that we went over today related to the criteria and requirements of participatory requirements of QCDRs and registries, but they do differ from that of health IT vendors and EHR vendors. So this process is a bit unique, and I would strongly encourage you to take a look at those documents once they're published to make sure you can meet the criteria and uphold the requirements throughout the performance period and data submission period before you self-nominate.
Great, thank you. Okay, your next question asks, does the print feature include the ability to download the entire application for final review and or in a format which we can edit, such as Word, so that we can make edits outside of the system and then copy it back into the system?
This is Anastasia. I can take that one. The print function does allow you to print, but it does print in a PDF format. I did actually test this the other day. I know it's not ideally what you're looking for with your specific question, but you certainly can do that print option, and before actually printing it, do a select all and copy and paste the information into a Word document if you are wanting to edit it that way. But Realistically, the print function was developed to essentially print the document so folks could print for their resources or for their reference. So it only unfortunately goes to the PDF, but there is that workaround that you could possibly use if for some reason you want a Word document to be able to kind of update and copy back in.
All right. Okay, another frequently asked question basically asked to clarify, on slide 9, it states that QCDRs or QRs must have at least 25 participants who are actively participating within the QCDR or QR by January 1st of 2020. So can you please just clarify how can new qualified registry vendors accommodate during that timeline?
Sure. To the point of the requirement is not that we want to avoid instances of vendors basically going live or testing their capability to be a registry and collect data as a registry type, vendor type in our program. We want you to be able to have 25 participants. Doesn't matter if they're reporting for purposes of MIPS, as long as you're able to demonstrate that you're able to collect data from these people, aggregate it, store it, calculate it. We want you to have that capability in place to just prove that you have the operational capability to stand up a registry before you self-nominate. We will not approve vendors who don't have those abilities in place before self-nomination. We don't want the downstream impacts or burden to fall to the clinicians if they find that their registry is not able to collect data or from the beginning of the performance period, or cannot store their data or aggregate it for them because the registry has not had all these issues ironed out before they self-nominated. So that's the whole point of that requirement. The 25 participants don't have to be from 25 organizations. We're not specific in that manner. It's more of at least it being either 25 individuals or 25 groups, or a mix of 25 individuals and 25 groups, or a mix of individuals and groups to make that number 25, to kind of have us understand that you have those capabilities, those technical capabilities of collecting and aggregating data. And it doesn't have to be and you don't have to have those people participate in your registry for purposes of MIPS. We just want to see generally that you're able to have this, you can meet these technical capabilities.
Great, thank you. All right, we had one final question come in. It asks, if a vendor offers both QCDR and qualified registries, can we use participants from both toward the 25 provider minimum requirement?
No, I believe the requirement is that it is based upon each vendor type being considered a separate vendor type. So if you're self-nominating as a QCDR and a registry, you are essentially creating two separate entities, vendor types, and we will treat them as such. So we'll expect for you to provide us 25, show us that you have the capability to collect data and have 25 participants for that vendor type, and then separately for your registry that you can do the same. Again, if you've already been an approved vendor, you should have already met these requirements for your existing vendor type. But the requirements are considered separate for each of the vendor types. You can't aggregate the information.
Okay, great. Okay, it looks like that is all we have in terms of questions for today. So Sophia, we will pass it back to you to conclude the webinar.
Great, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending today. Please stay tuned. We will have posted hopefully in the upcoming weeks the actual toolkit, which will have quite a few number of resources for you to utilize, including fact sheets and a technical guide with screenshots of the application to walk you through how to really complete the application. If you need a reference point, we do have our existing our 2020 self-nomination toolkit available and posted in the QPP resource library. Just be wary that that will be updated for 2021, so that those resources are not considered current at this point, but that will give you an idea of what we typically provide in terms of resources. And again, self-nomination begins on July 1st and will promptly close on September 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, if you have any questions regarding any of the requirements or if we were not able to get to your question, please feel free to submit a question to the QPP Service Center, and we will get back to you through that. I hope you all learned a lot from this today, and thank you for attending. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.